Hi there. I am Dr. Claudia Six, relationship and sex therapist. And today I'm going to talk to you about one of the most common reasons that people contact me, which is the death of intimacy in a relationship. Now, in America, people use the word intimacy as a euphemism for sex. So I'm going with that. But what I'm talking about is intimacy and sex, the death of intimacy and sex in a relationship. So there are three common scenarios that lead to this predicament. The first one is the couple who have never had great sex. They have what I would call functional sex. And ignorance is bliss. Maybe they don't know that it could be better. And they're fine with it. They've prioritized love and friendship and shared values. And it might get their attention at some point when they decide they want children, but they haven't been having sex or not enough to generate children. So that's one of the predicaments. The second scenario is that some major life event has happened. So, for example, an affair, a health problem, cancer, looking down the barrel of life and death puts things in perspective. Having children, making children, raising children, the death of a parent, some other life stressor, the loss of a job. These are the kinds of things, kind of like exercise. When you need it most, it's the first thing to go out the window. So these are times when sex is most likely to be something that couples forego. And a lot of people think sex is natural, but it's not. Sex is kind of an accident waiting to happen. So when life happens, the accident can happen. And when life stressors happen, people contract, they retreat, and they don't want to rock the boat. Now, the third scenario, and the most popular one, and the most common one, is what I call the slow fizzle, which is basically being complacent. So maybe sex at the beginning of the relationship was buoyed by novelty, maybe it was buoyed by alcohol, and the honeymoon phase, which can last a number of years, but when the honeymoon phase wears off and you see your partner for who they really are, disappointment can set in. And sometimes people are not very resilient about disappointment. And actually, how couples handle disappointment is one of the biggest predictors of long-term success of a relationship. So when couples are disenchanted, sometimes they play it safe and they pull back, and that's a significant dwindling of intimacy and sex. So you might ask, how do I fix this? Well, the first thing I do is I help couples diagnose what exactly the problem is, because it's often not what they come in with. So they might come in and say, well, we're too tired to have sex. And, maybe they're raising kids. I have a kid, I know the drill. But let me tell you, if sex is good, you're going to find the time to do it. So it's not about being too tired. Other times they might say, well, I'm a morning person and my partner's an evening person, and so we're ships passing and we just never have an opportunity. Well, if you are the person who goes to bed early, then stick to your routine and invite your late night beloved to come in and clean your clock and kiss you goodnight and tuck you in and go watch CNN, evening news, whatever they do after you go to sleep. So there is a way to find a time. Another common complaint I get is he's not doing it right. So assuming a heterosexual model for the sake of this conversation, it might be, because let's face it, it's always the wife who's complaining of that. It's not the guy. And she might say, well, I told him what I like and he did it once, but he hasn't done it since. And she's pissed. And a variation on that is he doesn't read my mind. So that's one of the things I figure out is what is really happening. So part of the way that I do this is determining faulty beliefs. We all have one big faulty belief about ourselves, and then a bunch of smaller ones just to keep it interesting. And these faulty beliefs, there's like 10 or 12 of them, and they're all variations on a theme of I'm not good enough. So I'm going to try and give you an example. For example, if his, again, assuming heterosexual model for the sake of this conversation, if his faulty belief is, I don't measure up, and her faulty belief is, I'm not seen. Imagine that, the evening is going along and he's wanting to engage his wife sexually, he's wanting to initiate, and maybe he decides that something she said, it's not a decision, it's a reaction that happens, it's an unconscious pattern. Maybe there's something that he misinterprets in what she says or what she does that causes him to feel like he doesn't measure up. What does he do? He pulls back and he retreats. What does she do? She makes it mean, oh, well, I'm not being seen because I'm desiring him and he's not reading my mind and he's not coming towards me and he's not making this happen. So I feel not seen. And what does she do? She pulls back and she retreats. And so you have two people who are retreating, who are hurt, who are playing it safe instead of talking about it, which is why they come to me. And that's one way that their faulty beliefs show up in the relationship, and their faulty beliefs are making decisions for them. So I explain all this to them and have them understand. Sometimes you can figure out the origin of the faulty belief, but that's not necessary. What I do also figure out is the origin of the problem. So the word trauma gets thrown around a lot these days, and I don't mean to be melodramatic, but trauma isn't always a really bad thing that happened. Sometimes trauma is a good thing that should have happened but didn't. So say if the mother has had postpartum depression, or the mother had a lengthy hospitalization for whatever reason and was not able to attune with her infant and was not able to respond emotionally to her child the way a child needs. For the child and in the child's brain, that is registered as trauma. And that shapes how you show up in the world, and it shapes how you show up in relationships. So I try to part of figuring out the origin of the problem is figuring out what people's traumas are and going into the trauma with them and helping them heal that trauma. Communication. Every single client I've ever seen has complained of communication. And I tell them, it's not that you're not communicating, it's that you don't like the communication you're getting. So say, for example, a couple is going at it and she says, are you done yet? What is she communicating? She's saying, I'm not enjoying this and I'm doing this just for your benefit, like all the other things I do just for your benefit, and it pisses me off. Or she's saying, this is a mercy fuck. Or she's saying, I hate that you are settling for this. And then if he plows forth and continues with what he's doing when she says this, what is he communicating? He's communicating, I need to get my dick wet and I need to come, and that's more important than how you feel. Or he's communicating, I am so vulnerable right now that I can't afford to see what you are feeling. Or he's communicating, I am settling for the crumbs that you have trained me to settle for. Either way, it's heartbreaking for everybody. So I always tell people it's not about sex. And you see, these examples are not about sex. So what I do is I help couples reconnect, I help them be vulnerable with each other, and I help them see each other. When people are feeling safe, they feel connected. And when people feel connected, they feel safe. Human beings are inherently vulnerable, but sometimes the vulnerability is too much to bear. It's just too much. It hurts. And that's when people shut down and they close off their hearts and they're not available to themselves or to their mate because they disconnect from themselves and they disconnect from their mate. So what I do is I help them reconnect with themselves, reconnect with their beloved, and it is the avoidance of pain that causes suffering. So these are some of the ways that I help couples rekindle sexual intimacy and sexual desire in their relationships. And I'm Dr. Claudia Six. I'm a relationship and sex therapist.